From here, we will then go to the regional names. So I told you that gross anatomy, one of the subsets of gross anatomy is the different regions. Well, in order to direct you to the appropriate region, then I name each of those regions, and then I can use those names to communicate to others to pay attention to this particular area because I've named that region. So what this means for you is that you're going to have to go through and identify all the names that are associated with the different areas of the body or regions. And we're going to have several different homeworks that will practice with this. And within a textbook that you have, there should be a picture and you should have these regional names. Now, I will not be going over each individual regional name in class, and so let's just take a few moments here to look at some of the regions. Now, these are sort of the most popular regions. These are now all of the regions. So if you look at the head, the common name is listed over here. We have head, but this is really the cephalic region. And the cephalic region is the entire head, both front and back, but that might be too large of an area. So we usually break it down with a line on the side of the head that is an oblique plane that cuts just below the ear. And everything in front of this is going to be the facial area, and everything in the back is going to be the cranial area, back and above. So why do we divide it like that? Well, the skull, or the cephalic region, if you look at the skull, we divide it into a cranium, which contains the brain. You could also call it the brain box. And then we have the facial area, or the face. Now, the cranium contains the brain, which is a large organ within the central nervous system. But the face, if you look at it, the bony structure encases your arguably most important sensory organs. And that is going to be your eyes, your nose, and your tongue or oral cavity. So the eyes, of course, are going to be your sensory for vision. Nose is sensation for smell. And the oral cavity, the tongue, is going to be your sensation for taste. So these very important sensations, those organs are housed in the facial area. Now, hearing, that is going to be your cochlea. That is actually in the cranial side, and that is going to house your sensation of hearing. So lots of things are happening within the cephalic region, or the skull. And because so many things are happening, we usually divide it into smaller things so that we can focus on a small number of objects or things at a time. Come down the neck, this is going to be the cervical area. And please be aware that cervical refers to not only this neck, but also the neck that attaches to different organs. So this is the cervical area. The cervix is a completely different area, and you have to be aware of that usage so that you're not poking around in areas where you might not be wanted. And then you have an upper extremity. This is going to be your upper limb and the structures that attach it to your body. So we're going to have a shoulder, and the shoulder is here, but the point of the shoulder right there, that's the acromion. And you'll learn that the acromion is a process that comes over and attaches to the spine of the scapula, and the scapula is the major bone in the back that is actually not attached to your body. It's floating around. Well, I shouldn't say attached to your body. It's not attached to the skeleton, except in one spot, and that's the acromioclavicular joint, and then the clavicle comes over, and the clavicle is attached only to the skeleton here at the sternoclavicular joint. So the clavicle is the only bony attachment of the scapula. The scapula is held to the body by a very large complex of muscles that attach it. So it's really free floating on your back, and this gives you great mobility, but the scapula is not attached very securely to the skeleton itself. So the acromial area here, that's going to be the shoulder, The armpit is the common name. That's the axilla here between the anterior fold that is pectoralis major and the posterior fold that is latissimus dorsi. And then between it, you've got sort of a valley that usually has hair on it, and that's where you put the deodorant. But that's your armpit, but it's also the axilla. And the axilla is a very important area of your body. All of the nerve and blood supply goes through the axilla into your upper limb. So if you damage the axillary area, it may be significant enough that you will not be able to use the upper limb. Now, typically when we say arm, we're talking about the entire upper extremity, but that area is too large. There are too many objects in that designation. So we're going to break it up. We've got an elbow here, so that seems like a good anatomical area to stop. So running from the shoulder to here, that's going to be the brachium. And the muscles that are attached there are going to have names like brachialis, biceps brachii. They're going to have brachium because this is your arm. Then from the elbow down to your wrist, that is going to be your forearm because it goes against or for the brachium. So this is your forearm. And then you get down to the wrist or carpus. And then you'll have the manus, and then you'll have the fingers that are attached. Those are going to be phalanges. So as you go down your list, the arm is brachial or brachium, and then forearm is going to be antibrachial or antibrachium. The changing of the end of the word changes it from a noun to an adjective. Wrist is carpal. You'll have the carpal bones. There are going to be 8 carpal bones located there. The hand, it's the whole thing, it's manual, but even that is too large of a region for the number of objects that are in there. So we'll actually divide that into metacarpal region, which we commonly refer to as the palm, and then we're going to have the fingers, which are phalangeal. So that at least gives you an idea of the regional names that are associated with the upper limb and upper body. Continuing, we then have the trunk, and we're going to divide the trunk based on the cavities. We're going to have a thorax, an abdomen, and a pelvis. And the thorax we have basically our cardio and pulmonary organs, heart and lungs. And then abdomen, primarily digestive system. However, there are a couple other organs that hang out within the abdomen. And then we have the pelvis. Now the pelvis contains primarily only the organs of urination or your reproductive organs. And we're going to divide them a little bit oddly. We're going to have the thorax here that basically starts here between the clavicles. This is your thoracic inlet where your neck is attached. And then that's going to contain the heart and lungs until you get to a physical barrier. That's going to be the diaphragm. It's going to be a muscle sheet that separates the thorax from the abdomen. And then you're going to have the abdominal cavity. But the abdominal cavity is not separated physically from the pelvic cavity. So in some textbooks, you'll see abdominal pelvic cavity because they are continuous with one another. But as we've seen, sometimes areas are too large to deal with. And so we are going to divide that into the abdomen, which is mostly digestive, and pelvis, which is urinary and reproductive. Now, the dividing line is an imaginary plane that is running from the sacral promontory down to the pubic symphysis. And that border will be shown in your textbook and on the pictures that we have in the slide presentations. So pay very close attention to that. You're absolutely going to have to know how you separate the pelvis from the abdomen. Now that we've dealt with the trunk, we can go to the lower extremity. We have a groin, and that is actually the inguinal area, and that's going to be in the area here where you have your inguinal canal. You have your buttocks, which is gluteal region, and gluteal then shares its name with the muscles that are there, gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus. The thigh, again, lower limb, leg. When we say leg, usually we mean from where the appendage is attached to the trunk down to the floor. That's too large, so we need to break it into thigh, which is the femoral region, and then we're gonna use the knee again as sort of our dividing point. And the knee is gonna be interesting because it's gonna have a patellar region in front and a popliteal region in back. And then below that, we have the leg, which is also too large. So we have a front side, which is the crural region, and we have a back side, which is the sural region. And then you go down to the foot, which you can divide into several different areas as well. But the entire foot, pedal, we're just gonna stick with that for this class. So thigh, femoral, knee, patellar, and popliteal, whether you're on the back or the front. Leg, crural or sural, whether you're on the front or the back. And then foot is pedal. You're a bipedal organism because you have 2 feet. And then you have an ankle. These are the tarsals. And you have 5 tarsal bones that are small that make up that joint. And then you have toes. And toes are called phalangeal. Now this drives me personally just a little bit crazy because now as an anatomist I should have individual names for each area, but now I've reused the name phalange. So sometimes the phalange is your finger and sometimes the phalange is your toe. Just make sure that you realize if you are ever asked how many phalanges you have, you say 20. Because you have 10 toes and 10 fingers. Now we can break them apart a little bit. This is Paul, so anytime you hear pollicis, you realize that we're talking about the thumb. And this becomes significant because if we have extensor pollicis longus, we have extensor pollicis brevis. Any muscle that goes to your thumb will have Paul or pollicis in its name. The great toe hallux, will then give that nomenclature to all the muscles that attach to the great toe. So your big toe will have muscles like flexor hallucis longus, flexor hallucis brevis, extensor hallucis longus. So anything that's hal will be your great toe, and that will be on your foot. And pollicis, that will be your thumb, and that will be in your hand. So from these regional names, we will go to